Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest CTO Craft Bytes. Today, we're going to take a look at Africa, the new frontier in tech. If this is your first time at CTO Craft Bytes, just let me know a little bit about this group. It's about CTO Craft about is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders around the world, focusing on supporting technologists in their leadership growth. Community members are about 5,000 at this time, and CTO Craft provides them with one-on-one coaching, mentoring groups in a curated Slack community and events like this one. So today, I'm pretty new here. My name is Sebastian, and I'm Polish-born, but grew up in Germany, and I learned coding at the age of 9. Formerly, I've created a couple of social networks, and I stumbled into fintech a couple of years back and built 2 companies in the fintech space. And now I'm conducting tech due diligences. I'm doing interim CTO work and also CTO coaching. Let's let Charles in, who will be my partner of today's interview. Hello, Charles.
Hello, Sebastian. Looking good. How are you?
You too. I'm great, Charles. How are you?
Yeah, winning. Thank you.
Charles, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, we had some conversations before, but everybody who's here doesn't know you that well yet. So maybe let's change this now.
Yeah, sure. So, hey, I don't know who's out there, but to everyone who is out there, welcome and greetings. So my name's Charles. I'm actually here in London at the moment. I'm a British-born Ghanaian. So Ghana is a country in West Africa. And I'm also CEO and co-founder of an organization called Movemeback. And Movemeback is, let's say, an African-focused tech startup, which ultimately is there to drive the social and economic development on the continent by connecting people to opportunities and connecting them to each other. Yeah? And we've been doing that for a while. So a little bit about my background. I was a very early stage entrepreneur, so set up my first business in my teens. Then I went into university, Imperial College, where I studied engineering and management. I then left and started a corporate career with the likes of Accenture, Tesco, McKinsey, before in 2013, seems so long ago, leaving and starting a lifetime of full-time entrepreneurship. Between then and now, I've built multiple different startups, invested in others in various regions, starting with the UK and the US, but ultimately for the last 5-6 years have been exclusively focused on Africa.
Cool. Thank you very much for the short introduction. So just a side note for everybody who's around here, there is a Ask a Question button, and you can press this Ask a Question button and then ask your questions so we can wave them into the conversation today. And also huge thanks to our headline partner, which is AWS, who makes all these events even possible. So let's talk about Africa. How did you even become an expert on Africa? You were born in the UK, so what was your main motivation? How did you get there?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, I have to say expert is a strong word. Why do I say that? Because this is a place of 1.2 billion people, 54 countries, over 2,000 languages spoken, and a landmass of probably around like 30 million kilometers squared, right? So comparing that with the rest of the world, Europe is about 10, US about 10, China's about 10, India's about 3. So like you could probably fit all of those into Africa's landmass. So it's a very big and diverse place. But nonetheless, African Ghanaian heritage. I actually grew up with a very African upbringing. So funny enough, when I grew up in the UK, my first language was Ga, which is one of the main dialects for Ghana. My parents were first generation. They moved here in the 60s or so. So they very much were here in the UK to work and to create opportunity for themselves, as many people do in the African context. And then we had a very African upbringing. So it was Africa at home, British at school. And so I think that was probably the start of that connection with the continent, even though I wasn't physically there. I then spent some time working there as a strategy consultant between 2009 and 2012 on big programs, either government related or large corporations. But I think it really kicked off in 2015. And that's almost this part of the story of how Movemeback came to be, where my co-founder and I, having invested and built various different businesses in the UK, we said, well, we actually left our corporate jobs to create impact at scale. And where else? And I think this is quite key for this conversation, actually, but where else can you be involved where there is a really interesting commercial story, but an even bigger impact story in terms of how you can affect the lives of the next generation of people, and not just people, but the rest of the world, right? And some of the stats we'll talk about later will show why that's the case. And so we spent some time on the continent. We're actually trying to move there, right, with a view that we're going to set something up, we're going to create something quite large, we're going to create jobs. Maybe if we do this well, we can create maybe 50,000 jobs over the next 10 years or something and build the ecosystem. And through that journey, we learned that, well, actually, you know what, there's so much potential here that this is not about us. It's about us creating a platform for the rest of the world to get involved in some shape or form, right? And not least what we call the African Diaspora, which is, those who have of African heritage, or those who are from Africa who have left and are dispersed around the world, in their tens and hundreds of millions, who in many cases are some of the best educators around the world, and create a pathway for them to get to get engaged and get involved with the African continent. And so, that journey then led us to Movemeback, which now operates in 170 countries. We are the largest curated community of leaders operating in Africa, or with a focus on Africa anywhere. We operate across all 54 countries, so we understand the nuances between Francophone, English speaking, West, North, Sub-Saharan, Arabic speaking, etc. And as a tech startup, the data that we have is we're very privileged to really be experts on Africa, if I can use that phrase.
Mm-hmm. So I think it would be also good if you could share some facts about the African ecosystem in general, because most of us, like including me, or especially me, I had no clue about this before we met the first time.
Sebastian, we're going to need 2 sessions for this. It's reality, right? There's so much information, there's so much richness, there's so much data, there's so much to understand. And what I think is really important for people to get, if this is their sort of first foray into Africa, is time means that I'm going to be speaking very generally. Yeah, but like I said, it's a very diverse place, Africa, and there's not a one fits all kind of summary or solution. But look, my narrative is really clear, because I think a lot of people on the call, as a CTO call, probably thinking that what is this? What's the link with Africa? Here's someone who does work in Africa, they're African focused. What has he got to sell me, right? And so before I go into talking about Africa itself, I just want to make clear that I'm not actually here to sell anything. I'm here to sell something, actually. I'm here to sell part of my passion and letting people in to understand what's going on in the world. But I'm certainly not here to sell people a Ferrari. Yeah, we're here to tell the real story. But what I am here to tell you is that, hey, there's a Volkswagen Golf that's sitting in your driveway. Yeah, and you're waking up every single day, and you're waking the horse up, and you're cleaning down the carriage to go to work in your horse and carriage, right? But this Volkswagen Golf is there, and you don't realize it. What's more is, it doesn't run on petrol, it runs on ethanol. And that's probably why you haven't kind of tapped into it, but it's there. And it's there to be used, and it's about time you kind of woke up to its presence. And that's pretty much the African story, right? This is a place of 1.2 billion people, right? It's massive. Pre-COVID, probably one of the fastest growing regions in the world. There are 54 countries, but many of the countries were growing in the top 10 list of fastest growing countries anywhere in the world. And when you look at the trajectory of Africa, actually it's increasing in size, it's increasing in youth. It's going to, by 2050, it's reported that the population is probably going to double, maybe triple, right? And what you're going to have is, by 2035, more young Africans entering the workforce each year than in the rest of the world combined. Yeah, so those are some of the high level stats around this. I think the thing that Africa is typically known for is, it's very resource rich. So 30% of the world's mineral reserves are in Africa, 40% of the world's gold, etc. 12% of world's oil reserves. I mean, I think that's the old story of Africa, but it can't be ignored, right? the conversation we're having today, the technology that's being used, if you really break it down to the value chains and supply chains that enable that, Africa is involved in some shape or form. Yeah. But I think despite that story, despite all of the the scale and the opportunity, it still has a GDP of about 1.2 trillion. Sorry, not 1.2 trillion. It has a GDP of it's about 2.8 trillion or so. But whatever it is, like these numbers move all the time, but it's around the same as the UK, right? And if you think of the size of the UK, 60 million population, you think all of Africa has a GDP of 2 trillion or so, 2 to 3 trillion. It gives you an indication of the scale of the opportunity that exists, right? Massive. And I personally believe over the next 15, 20 years, there's a 10 trillion opportunity to be uncovered quite easily. Yeah, 10 trillion opportunities spread across B2B and household consumption. Yeah. So that's the kind of high level picture of Africa. There has been a trend over the last 5-10 years to really reflect on Africa and the potential and the opportunities. But I think we have to also be honest and say that most of the opportunity lies in the problems that exist in Africa. Like, it is ultimately still very much a developing region. Yeah. And when you look at all of the key sort of indicators or socioeconomic indicators, whether it's like, access to electricity, whether it's access to education, whether it's like disparity, it scores very low on the scale, right? So to give you an example, Nigeria is in West Africa, it's one of the most populous countries in the world. I think Africa's most populous nation, and also its biggest economy. It has a GDP of, I think it's around 400-500 billion. Yeah. About 60% of Nigerians live on less than $1.25 a day, right? Just to put it in context. Yeah. However, there's a flip side to that story, right? Where actually, when you look across the African continent, we have somewhere in the region of like $100 million or $1 million millionaires, whatever you call them. It's not a millionaire, but $100 millionaire. About 2 billion billionaires, and the disparity between ultimately those who have and those who don't is massive. But I think those who have give some indication of the opportunity that exists, right?
So speaking of opportunities, so we spoke briefly before, and we said that you have pointed out that there are some challenges on a daily basis, like what people have to face in their daily lives. But these challenges don't mean that the people are blocked from doing something. It's more opportunities, right? So could you give us some challenges that are faced by African people we might even not imagine?
Yeah, sure. So I think a lot of the challenges are kind of well publicized, and they come down to the most important things, in life, right? Like access to food, access to energy, access to water, education, all of these sorts of things. So to give you an example, if we look at education, I think the stat for education is around 20% of African children are not in education. Yeah, and there may be various different reasons for that. Some of it is living in remote areas, some of it is being tied in with family business, etc. But think about the opportunity there. 20% is massive, right? That's a massive number. Think of the technology, and you look at internet and mobile penetration, which is on the rise. There is a very interesting e-learning opportunity that exists for the African nation to solve some of those problems, because let's face it, we're not going to build schools quickly enough to solve that problem. However, for the people on this call and for people who have been in the trenches and working on these sorts of solutions, there is a massive gap there, a massive opportunity waiting, right? That's one example. The big mover, or the big line on the move when it comes to the African continent of late has been fintech. I think similar to many parts of the world. But we were, 10 years ago, we were talking about really, really low numbers in terms of those who are banked on the continent. Banked means access to a bank account ultimately, which has all sorts of implications for what people can do in life, right? Whether they can access capital for growing their business, or for consumerism, or whatever it is. When people don't have access to the banking system, they're ultimately very much constrained. Yeah, and so fintech has been a massive boost to the African ecosystem, and it's one of the fastest growing anywhere. And we've actually had a number of unicorns emerge over the last couple of years in the African continent, off the back of fintech, right? And solving some of these problems around people having access to bank accounts. Whichever sector you look at, whether it's insurance, whether it's whether it's in food manufacture, or access to various resources, like there are huge opportunities there that ultimately technology can solve, right? And smart people coming together and looking for new solutions to old problems. And I think it's worth highlighting. One thing that's worth really highlighting is many of the problems that are faced on the continent now are emerging problems that will happen across the rest of the world, right? Take, for example, I mean, one of the challenges for Africa, and actually a lot of Africa's kind of operations are undocumented because it has a massive informal economy. Yeah, if you look, and when I say informal economy, it's talking about people who have structured jobs, and on any given week they'll be doing the same thing, right? And it's very predictable. And if you look at the direction the rest of the world is headed in, with the gig economy and various other instances, it tells you that actually some of the problems that we're trying to solve for on the African continent are going to be pretty around the rest of the world, right? Like the UK, for example, has a massive productivity problem, which it's trying to solve, right? You've got the over 40s and 50s who are increasing by the numbers. Even a place like Japan, where they sell more diapers for old people than for young people, right? You've got this group of people who are part of, ultimately still able to be part of a workforce, who can't be repurposed in a way to make them productive and help generate output for an economy, right? Africa has that same problem, but for various different reasons, right? So you've got an education system that is kind of pumping. I gave you the figures earlier around how many young people come to the market, pumping people into this economy, for the workforce for the entire globe in the future, right? And the problem is there's a disconnect between the education system and the workforce, right? So these people are coming to the market, they're not trained up in the right way, and they're not finding the right jobs, and they're not being useful within the economy, right? And we need to find a way to be able to identify those people, identify talents, train those people up, purpose them for the right roles, because that's how economies grow. And these are the same challenges that have been faced by the older generation in other countries, right? The same technologies, the same solutions that solve it for the world's young workforce will solve it for the world's old workforce. Yeah.
So maybe let's move a little bit towards the industry that we want to create, the startups, the whole scene, or which of course already exists there, but we want to augment, or maybe build the next new wave of new startups and new fintechs, whatever you like. What do you think? Can we just, in order to build those companies, we need services, external services, third-party providers, and can we just use what we already have? Or what do you think about that? Can we just use, all the Google, the AWSs just to build those startups? Or do you think that we need some special requirements here?
Well, I think it's a very good start what we have, right? Some people will listen to some of the the early introductory remarks I've made and think, well, some of those stats and some of those things with regards to Africa have always been that way. It's been that way for the last 100 years. Why is it different this time around? What's happening this time around is, we're into a stage where, access to information is almost ubiquitous, right? Like the ability for someone to be sitting in Malawi and have access to information around what's going on in the US, or what's going on in, in Qatar or various other places, to be able to, to spin up a laptop or a Raspberry Pi or whatever, and just be able to actually do something and have the information and the access at their fingertips, it is something that is unprecedented, right? And this is why I think my call to people on the line is, this wave that's going to happen in Africa, and we'll talk about the other waves that have happened in other places, is going to go so fast that you kind of need to get on the boat right now. Yeah, it's going to move so quickly because the parameters for this game are completely different. Growth is slowing down in the rest of the world, right? Investors are looking for places to put their capital. Whereas one place on this planet that everybody is going to start looking towards over the next few years and saying, right, this is the kind of the uncharted green territory. Anyway, getting back to your question. The services that we have give us a foundation that was not there. So thank God for Google, thank God for Twitter, thank God for Facebook, all of these platforms that have ultimately connected the African continent with the rest of the world. Yeah. The challenge is these services have typically worked quite well for people like me. Yeah, people like me who, are very much compatible with the Western way of thinking. We kind of move in and out of different economies. I've worked in 6 different continents. You move in and out of these different places. So I'm sitting in Africa, there are many of these services are very relevant to me. However, as we were talking about, let's take LinkedIn, for example. And I know LinkedIn very intimately because ultimately what we are building through Movemeback is Africa's version of LinkedIn. Now, LinkedIn has a presence of about 30 million users in Africa. Yeah. That's about the same as the UK again. There are always a lot of parallels between the whole African continent and the UK economy. 30 million users. Now, that's 30 million out of like 1.2 billion. And let's not disrespect LinkedIn here. They've done a great job. But when you break it down, you think to yourself, well, when LinkedIn looks at its product roadmap and it's got 30 million users in Africa, most of them are not paying. And when we look at their actual B2B customers, most of them are not actually, are not a very small sliver of their revenue. I'd imagine it's less than 1%, like significantly less than 1% actually. You get to a stage of realizing that their product roadmap is not going to be solving for the problems that Africa needs to solve for, right? So for example, sticking with the LinkedIn example, Africa has tens of millions of youth who are the next best thing in terms of talent. I mean, you only need to look at music and culture and sport, where it's a lot easier to expose these types of individuals and see the impact that Africa has on the rest of the world. I mean, just go look at any Premiership or even Series A or any of those groups and look at the talent that Africa has exported. Yeah, look at the French national team. That same talent pool exists in every other single industry. However, it's not going to have a nice LinkedIn profile. It's not going to have Harvard on the CV. It's not going to have PwC on the profile. How do you find these people? How do you profile them, right? We need a new set of solutions that caters for the 80%, that missing middle that exists in Africa who need to be part of the workforce, as an example. That's just one example. And there are countless others, right? But ultimately, the short answer to your question is the services that have come before are a very good foundation for us to build on. But there's a new wave of entrepreneur that is required to take those baselines and customize and create platforms and create solutions for the African consumer, right? And for the African business that caters to the position that the African economy is. I mean, you've got some countries in Africa which are, I would say, are very much in like 1950s US development stage, right? And there are others which are, take South Africa, for example, where parts of it are actually miles ahead versus some of the economies that we see. Or even look at the example of East Africa, right? And M-Pesa, which is an example people would love to show, where you're talking about Monzo wallets and all of these other things. Stuff's been done in Africa for the last 10 years. Like people have been paying for things through their mobile, transferring money all the time.
Yes, on feature phones, by the way, right? On feature phones.
Yeah, on feature phones. And I think that's what's interesting about innovation, right? Like, for me, entrepreneurship and innovation is about creating solutions with limited resources. And when you're in an environment that constrains you to with the resources you have, that's where true innovation comes out. You look at the innovation that can happen on the continent, how that can be exported to the rest of the world. It's pretty scary. Yeah. So yes, we need to create. We need the new generation of entrepreneurs, technologists, thinkers, doers who are creating solutions that are catered to the African context.
Cool. So maybe let's dive a little bit deeper into tech requirements, because we have a community of CTOs who also want to hear some tech, and I believe it's also relevant that we talk about what would startups in Africa. So if I come and join a startup in Africa, what would change for me in comparison to what I would have in Europe, for example, right? So would I basically I want to talk about platforms on mobile. I want to talk about data centers, and I want to talk about what modern technologies you see emerging from the African continent.
Sure. Yeah, but let's talk about the important and good things in life first, right? Like good food, good weather, fun people, diversity, all sorts of things. I mean, it's often overlooked, but some may say the quality of life that you get on the African continent far exceeds that, whether you look at it from a happiness index or anything else, but anywhere else in the world, right? But we are in 2021. We're all locked down in our houses, so it's not necessarily about traveling. Like, you can get involved from wherever you are, and I think that's a key point to raise here. Yeah. Before I just jump into some of the technology, maybe I'll just say a little bit more about the ecosystem, Sebastian, if I may, just around comparisons with where we are in the UK. So In 2010, I was involved in a project with number 10, David Cameron's administration, in taking and looking at Tech City, which it was labeled at the time, I'm not sure if we still call it that, but the UK ecosystem, right? Which at the time, I think maybe had like single-digit unicorn companies, right? But it was a very, very early stage ecosystem, right? Fast forward to 2021, and you could say it's easily like in the top 3, top 4 of like tech ecosystems. I mean, some say it's number 2 behind Silicon Valley, joint with New York, right? But in terms of capital inflows, in terms of VC interest, it was pretty much non-existent. I mean, if you ask me what London's tech city was back in the day, it was design. Like, we were very, very strong at like design, and you had a lot of agencies and product agencies, and that's evolved completely, right? And I think actually UK has played to its strength very much. So with finance, but the African ecosystem is, I would say right now, and it's a generalization, but you look at some of the hubs, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, Ghana, it's in a place of where the UK was 10 years ago, right? So if you do the maths, if you look at the UK has just hit 100 unicorns. Not that unicorns mean everything, but it's an easy metric to use. If you do the maths, you see that, well, actually, we could be 10 years away from something very similar. Actually, my prediction is we're probably 7 years away from something very similar happening. And the question is, like, when do you get involved? Like, now is the time to be getting involved. I think this journey has really kind of kicked off over the last 3 years, and now's an interesting time. So if you're sitting in the audience, you're like, well, I think our audience is quite a senior cohort of people, right? There's people who are leading in their organization within tech, or more broadly as co-founders, or CEO -1, CEO -2. If you're that level of individual, you're thinking, right, so what's the next move for me? You have previously thought that the African continent is a place where I might get some cheap resources, in the same way that India has become this amazing tech resource for the rest of the world. I don't think that's going to be the story. I think there's definitely that is happening, but I think the compelling story, and the story that is going to be more interesting, is this mass exodus of tech talent to get involved, in the next frontier of technology companies that are going to be moving and growing so quickly for the most populous markets, right? And I think people in this cohort are very privileged in the sense that, if you think about the challenges the UK had similar to what Africa will have now, when you have got a new way of thinking, a new way of doing things, I mean, we're ultimately talking about economies that are on the transition from being traditional, agri-focused or land-focused or property, physical assets, to now the idea of technology and scale-ups, right? You don't build experience of how to do a scale up, or if you're a company that has raised several hundreds of millions or tens of millions and need to scale up very quickly, that's not the sort of thing that you just learn overnight. You need people with experience, you need people with expertise, you need people who have done and seen that before. Otherwise, you're not going to be a startup. You're going to end up being an SME, right? And that's where there's certainly a gap in both knowledge and a gap in expertise that exists on the African continent, right? So cue the opportunity for the people in the audience, and we see this all the time. Like, when companies raise money, they come to Movemeback, right? And they look to build their teams. And the biggest challenge that a lot of them have is, right, I need a CTO that has done SaaS, that has scaled something from 1 million users to 10 million users. I need someone who has done X, Y, and Z. I need people who have done product and know how to scale up a team and know how to interface that with the development team, like all of these things, right? And so the continent needs expertise, and expertise with experience. If you are sitting in the audience and you're thinking, well, I probably need to take a massive pay cut, because Charles just mentioned that the average income for the African household or the African individual is $1.25. It's not really how it works, actually. So just to give an example, we are seeing, if you compare with, say, maybe Berlin or even London, maybe London's a bit excessive, but other parts of the UK, we are seeing actually very similar salary kind of indexing across the senior talent in Africa versus the rest of international tech ecosystems. I think Silicon Valley is an anomaly, and it's crazy, right? Salary wise, but don't be surprised if you can secure a role or join a team with a very decent equity stake, and then on top of that, maybe 100K salary or so, right? That's not an alien concept, just to put that in context. The challenge really is, I think, for people on the team, they're going to be saying, this all sounds on the call and say, this sounds great, but it's like, how do you get started, and how do you even know like what is a relevant organization? And let's be honest, that is probably one of the biggest challenges that we're also trying to solve, which is creating more transparency, creating ease of understanding of the markets, right? So if anything, that's where the challenge will be for others, making that connection with these organizations. But they're there and they're hungry, right? And many of the people who are running this new generation, new age of companies are African, but they're also got international perspective, right? If you look at the pool of African founders, or the ones that are certainly building the businesses that are growing very quickly, many of them have experienced living and working in multiple continents, right? These are the Stanford grads, these are the YC alums. We are talking very high quality talent and very high quality companies. I'm not sure if it's me, but I think you might be on mute, Sebastian. But I think he said something like, "Hey, you're looking good, Charles."
Yes, this is exactly what I said. You can read my lips. This is very nice.
Yeah.
One more talent. So, and on the other side, or in addition to that, I would like to ask you actually why this should be relevant for me and the audience. But you have answered the questions already, because you said that there are a lot of opportunities for CTOs potentially to join African companies, right? So I think, yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, just to reiterate, I think it's relevant for a number of really quick reasons. I think number one, my prediction is, and it's not a biased prediction, but I think, if we look for the next 10 years, the largest proportion of unicorns are going to come from the African continent. Yeah, and it's going to move faster than we have seen in previous waves. That's number one. So if your motivation is being part of building something big, whether it's for like status, whether it's for money, whether it's for just like doing cool stuff, it should be on your radar. Number two, opportunity, right? I've already mentioned that I think sometimes as a senior engineer, you're looking for that next big opportunity, and they can be quite hard to come by, right? I mean, there are, at any given point in time, there are a few superstar organizations, and everyone's fighting to get in and be leaders within those organizations. There's a whole set of opportunities opening up right now. Interestingly, we recently helped one of the ex-Monzo leadership transition to join an East African startup who are doing something quite similar, actually, for the African market, a YC company. And so now, and this gentleman, he resides in I think it's Barcelona, and so he's working between Barcelona and Tanzania, in this organization, which could be the next biggest thing in like moving money around the world, globally. And so, yeah, opportunity, like there is opportunity for you to find actually the perfect role for yourself, which actually may be in shorter supply in the UK, and to actually have, maybe even play a higher status role than you would have had in a more mature organization here in the UK or wherever it is that you are. And then I think there's something around just generally this whole area of fulfillment, right? African tech is solving real world problems for real people, right? We're not looking at how you can get more clicks on ads. Yeah, we're looking at how you can get everyone into school, how you can get everyone, decent healthcare. You're looking at, how you can drive the workforce of the future. There are so many different areas that African tech is solving for, right? It doesn't have time for mediocre problems, right? People are hungry, people need to eat, and there's huge opportunity. And so when you talk about fulfillment, you will be solving unique problems in challenging terrains, in very diverse environments, right? Just even take a place like Cameroon. Half the country is English speaking, half the country is French speaking. How do you even navigate that, right? Next door to that, you've got Ghana, you've got Nigeria, you've got completely different markets. Like, what does expansion look like when you're trying to move between these different markets? Completely different language, no unified currency system, right? These are like real challenges that technology will have to solve in order to scale. We were involved in Uber scaling across the continent. Like, we launched Uber launched and built their teams in multiple cities in Africa. Every single city was different, right? And every single city was a challenge, and you had to develop different strategies. For example, in Nigeria, people are not the mindset that actually you hire a ride, right? It's not, you don't pay for a ride, you pay for a driver. right? I'm like, I have a driver for a day. That's the mindset. It's like, how does Uber like adjust to that? Also, when you look at those who drive taxis, they typically are not going to have the type of car that Uber would expect. So what you do, you have to bring in partners who are going to be investors for these vehicles. You need to bring in new forms of Nigeria, for example, was not a cashless society back in 2015, 2016. How do you actually make that Uber model work? So many different interesting nuances. And what you then see organizations do, for example, the telcos, who are some of the most, you've got various different industries within Africa. You've got the resource companies, you've got the telcos, you've got others who are traditionally very successful as telcos. Their success by telcos, sorry, it may be jargon to some, like telecommunication companies, so your EEs of the world, your Oranges of the world, etc. In order for them to succeed, they've had to vertically integrate. They built their own power station, they built their own trading platforms, they built everything, right? Because this is how you solve for difficult terrains. And so, sorry, just to get back to the point, that third piece around fulfillment, you are going to do some really, really cool things, and you're going to have some really cool stories to tell to your grandchildren, and you're going to be a hero or a heroine.
That sounds very promising. And also, one point that came to my mind is that let's compare, because I'm on the German market. I'm active in the German market usually, and I've built some fintechs here. And so what we've seen here is that there are a lot of standards which are antiquated. And if you are basically in an African country, sometimes you can even create the standard. It can make it more modern. You can build new structures. And so what was a burden for us might be a huge and interesting challenge for you if you enter the African market.
Yeah, absolutely. I almost always think about anyone who's building anything worth talking about on the continent now is building a platform. Yeah, I mean, it's you could say it's a service, you could say it's a product, but it's a platform, right? And the comparison I always like to say is just think of think of the London Underground and the age of the tube and how difficult it is to make improvement. Like the Western economies are very much in maintenance and incremental mode, right? I mean, how long have we been trying to build HS2 or just get a third runway into Heathrow? That's not going to be the story that we see in other parts of the world, right? You look at India, you look at you look at places like Delhi, and you look at their internet infrastructure, and you're like, wow, you guys are averaging like 120 MBS, and I'm here, in West London, averaging somewhere like 15. But ultimately, it's a side point. But the reality is, there is opportunity to build the new platforms of the next generation, platforms that will actually be used internationally. Yeah. So everything that we see coming out of Africa, we think is a contender to be a platform of the future. Like we've seen with M-Pesa, like we've seen it with others, a platform of the future for the rest of the world. Yeah.
Cool.
Because in the rest of the world, there's baggage of what has come before, and the innovation, the room for innovation doesn't exist. A great example of this, I think, COVID really brought this to light, where some of the first medical supply deliveries were done via drones, were done in Africa, right, by African startups who realized that road transport infrastructure is challenging. We need to get blood, we need to get medicines to remote areas. How do we do that? We use drones, right? And we're seeing that mapped out and rolled out across the rest of the world.
Great. So look, Charles, I know that you are a good salesman, so let's close some deals here. If I want to join, what should I do? What should I do mentally, and what should I do actively? If I just say, okay, this sounds like a good challenge, where can I look for some new challenge? Where can I? How do I have to prepare myself to mentally and maybe like physically in order to be fit for Africa?
Yeah, it's a shame we don't have more time, because there's so many things that I've glossed over, and I feel for the audience a little, because they've had to run around so many different facts and figures. But I mean, let's just keep it really simple. Firstly, saying that for technologies that you work in are very relevant for the African continent. The African continent are using modern technologies today. The lamp stack wasn't really a thing. It didn't have the opportunity to grow on the continent. The modern technologies of today are what you'll be working on the African continent tick. For the nature of people on this call, compensation and lifestyle, will be maintained if you're actually on the ground. Once you've got yourself set up, your quality of life could actually increase, tick. So really the big challenge remaining is like, so, okay, this sounds great, but how do I get started? And like there are 54 countries to pick from, and there's so much nuance and various different factors to consider. Where do I get started? And the reality is it's not easy. And my first bit of advice is this here really actually wasn't a sale. It was more, I just wanted to ensure that people know that this is happening in the world, right? Because we don't want, Africa is China 2.0. A lot of people were sleeping on China. A lot of people were sleeping on India. A lot of people are sleeping on a lot of these opportunities, right? And I want people to be aware of them. So if it piques your interest in some shape or form, and this Africa is going to take up more and more of press columns over the next few years. But if it piques your interest, I think the first thing is to engage in some shape or form and start understanding the ecosystem and learning and reading. If you want to explore further, I think it's always helpful to have someone to grab you by the hand and just give you a little bit of guidance and just be like, look, there's a lot of noise. Focus on these 3 different areas. Yeah, and that's maybe where we can come in. With what I do with my organization, in the sense that for the last 5 years, we've ultimately been connecting people to understand and get involved with the African ecosystem, whether that's individuals, whether that's governments, whether that's institutions, whether that's companies. Yeah, and for individuals, we're actually really, really focused at the moment on tech because it is a barrier to Africa's growth, right? Not having the right people at the right time to build and scale up some of these companies. So if you are interested, what I would encourage everyone to do is to get in touch with us. Yeah, we're not selling you anything. You're not paying for anything. We want to just get people connected to the ecosystem. And in order to do that, you can just go to Movemeback and you can sign up. But actually what we have is we do have a link and an email which we will distribute later. And also there's various materials that we can share for anyone who's more interested. But if you are interested, I would really encourage you to head over to mmb.africa/tech. And what you'll find there is just a really quick form that you can fill in expressing interest. And then someone from our team will get in touch and like give you and share more information. And really, it's just kind of the first step and expressing an interest to actually be like, when stuff comes up, this is something I might want to hear about. If we're having information sessions, this is something I might want to hear about. Or if I'm really serious and I actually want to engage, whether that's on an informal basis as an advisor or a contractor or something else, all of those opportunities exist. So yeah, that's mmb.africa. Just put the HTTP in front of it. mmb.africa/tech. And also you can email us at tech@mmb.africa. And hopefully those will be made available somewhere. Oh, very good.
I've posted in the chat.
You're a magician.
Try my best.
All right.
So if I'm, let's say, maybe go a little bit into the detail because there was a fact I heard about Africa. Is it true that there are more iOS developers than Android developers, or is it the other way around? How does it work for Africa? Because like for the US especially, it usually is that everybody is on iOS and there are 3 people on Android, right? In Europe, it's more balanced. So how does it look in Africa? Because developers also want to know where they can find the opportunities.
Yeah, so Android is a massive market within Africa. So I think Android actually makes up, when you think of the consumer, the actual handset market, Android is, I think, someone reaching 85% of mobile penetration in Africa. Yeah, I think part of the reason for that is you've got a far broader range of device handsets at different price points. Yeah, so everything from your high-end Samsung all the way through to some of the a mass of Chinese branded handsets that have entered the market. iOS is very much, you can actually segment. You can do this in the UK, but not as well. But you can really segment your customer typically by iOS and Android. Yeah, but the bulk, I would say, where the real opportunity is in the Android market, right? That type of consumer, those who want to access services. So yeah, Android developers. For any Android developers out there, huge opportunities for you. A lot of some of the solutions that organizations or startups are putting together are not necessarily sort of native intensive. So your React Native guys out there, your Flutter guys, or these hybrid platforms, huge opportunities there. But generally speaking, people who are fast learners, people who have experience with multiple different technologies, and senior talent, so CTOs, VP of engineering, people who can structure a team and build process within an engineering team and bring excellence to a team. Your product guys, your UX, your designers, across the board. Yeah,
that's exactly people who are watching right now. So you got your audience.
Absolutely.
So what's what would you say? What is your plan for the next 5 to 8 years?
Yeah, is that me personally or me as
You as a platform, and of course you personally. So
all
what?
right.
How? Because you have some insights on the market, and you know how it's going to develop. So it's also like, what do you see? What's your vision for the next time, for the next
Yeah.
5 years?
Okay, sure. The first thing that I want to plug is I want to bring Formula One to the African continent, right? Hence why I'm wearing this T-shirt. I'm hoping Toto Wolff is watching somewhere and he's gonna reach out and say, "Hey, Charles, let's do it." But no, actually, something we're very serious about. Why am I serious about that? Because I think that Formula One has been at the nexus of influence and affluence for a long time, and looking at the next generation of consumers in the automotive space. And it's about time that we had Formula One on the continent. So we're going to make that happen, firstly. But that's just a side project. In terms of what we're doing, I think a lot of people would be surprised to know that actually, you spoke about some of the previous platforms out there. Africa doesn't really have its kind of own leading digital technology platform, right? Consumer platform. With data that can be harnessed in a way to actually drive some of these social and economic development goals, right, for the continent. So that very much is our focus for us, right? So we run Movemeback as part of our broader organization. And we're ultimately trying to solve key problems across key areas, right? Everything from interconnectivity between people across the world and Africa, all the way through to creating the next 500 million jobs for the continent needs. For Movemeback specifically, we intend to become Africa's largest technology platform for professionals, right? And part of that is ensuring that all of the untapped talent, all of the 500 million or so people who will need to be involved in the African workforce can get involved in some shape or form, right? And that's very much our focus, and becoming almost, some might say, LinkedIn of Africa meets dating platform, where we're ultimately solving for three key things. The first thing is creating like uber transparency in this market. Like, this is what's going to drive the African market. Like, anyone who is working on anything, your goal is to create transparency and information flow. Right. If we can achieve that, people can access information. They can access information easily, quickly, readily, and make good decisions. That drives economies, right? So that's the first thing for us. Transparency for us of where the talent is, where the opportunities are, and make sure that they can find each other. Secondly, connectivity. Yeah, the ability, and not just from an infrastructure perspective, but the ability for people to connect with each other. When we talk about social mobility, when we talk about any region, you talk about people's ability to push and move to the next level, to make a better life for themselves. It ultimately comes down to who they can connect with, right? And part of the problem within the continent is it's a bit of a black box, right? And so you land in a lane and you stay in that lane, and we need to be able to create inflows between people, right? And then thirdly, something that's relevant to Africa but the rest of the world is personal development, and how do you help people transition themselves, whether it's through training, whether it's through understanding what their interests are, transition themselves to the next level, right? So those are like three key areas for us that kind of cut across all of what we do. And then wrapped around that, we're constantly going to be working with partners and various others to just keep putting in the infrastructure in place that's going to drive Africa. Yeah, but the headline is that we're creating 500 million jobs over the next 15 years, and with various others. We're going to create a place that ultimately is the center of the world, right? The central workforce, the central hub for technology, central hub for resources, and a good place to holiday too.
Great. These were great closing words, Charles. Thank you very much.